Hey guys, Alex here. So having talked about basic edge play in the previous episode, we want to talk about a little bit more on edge play. Today will be more about edge play maneuvers before we move on to other topics. Hey guys, so today we're going to be talking about Othello edge play maneuvers. So in the previous episodes, I actually featured Othello boards in the cover page. And from this episode going forward, I would like to feature the cities that hosted the World Othello Championships. So starting from 1977, the city of Tokyo. So there you have the Tokyo Tower. So let us now talk about the topics that I'd like to cover today. So the topics are feeding edges, edges in equilibrium, and forming pairs. So let's talk about feeding edges. In the previous episode, we actually talked about how we could attack unbalanced edges, such as a five-sided unbalanced edge. So now if we take a look at this situation over here, whereby black has essentially a few key discs, while white is actually maximizing and grabbing all the edges. So over here at the bottom, you can see that it's a three-sided unbalanced edge. So we want to talk about how we can actually convert this into a five-sided unbalanced edge. So first of all, black could choose to play f8, and white would then have to respond to g8 instead of f7, because if white went into f7, black would be able to capture b8 and actually force white to play the x square and give up the corner. So in this situation, white definitely has to respond to g8, and if white responds to g8, black would then be able to jump into f7. And basically, black has successfully converted the original 3-disc unbalanced edge to actually a 5-disc unbalanced edge, which is also attackable from the left. So if we continue the game onwards, white basically only has one move and has to play g7. And if black feeds the corner by playing a7, white would take the corner because white wouldn't go into the x square and surrender the corner. So if white takes the corner, black can then jump into b8 and form the wedge that we talked about in the previous episode by exchanging these 6 stable discs in exchange for a potential 7. So white continues this way, and black jumps in for the corner at h8, successfully attacking that lower unbalanced edge, which was originally 5 discs. So you may think that black is still in a very tough situation in trying to win the game, but in actual fact, it's quite easy that black can actually work his way around the board and secure the win from here. So let's just see how black could potentially win from here. So black, having this stable edge, can continue to go with the flow in a more anti-clockwise manner to build towards his strength instead of going on a clockwise manner that actually lets white plays to his strength. So let's play black over here, and then potentially we can finish the game off by playing a diagonal cut across to the x square, because basically black has this corner and controls this and only give white one move. So white continues with a2, and basically black can play this move, forcing white to go this way, and then black, white, and black, and finally white. So basically black has successfully attacked the unbalanced edge and also wrapped up the game in a very nice, stable manner in which he didn't really give his opponent many options to play with. So earlier we actually talked about how to feed and convert a 3-disc unbalanced edge to a 5-disc unbalanced edge, which is also attackable. Right now I would like to talk about the second point about feeding edges, which is forcing a wall. So given the situation right here, basically white has grabbed 2 edges, which is somewhat forming a pair, which we will talk about later in the session. But for now, I'd like to talk about how we can actually feed edges by forcing a wall. So if I were playing black right now and I were to play h4, for example, over here, white would definitely have to respond by grabbing the edge, or is expected to respond that way by playing h5. So what is a wall? A wall is typically consisting of 8 discs, which is all of the same color, on all the B and A squares and all the inner A and inner B squares. So For now, I will not really go into the detail of why a wall may be bad, but please just take it as face value at the moment that a wall is generally attackable, just like how an unbalanced edge is attackable. So if we jump in to feed the edge, it's basically forcing white to complete or fill up the edge and form a wall. So that's how you feed a walled edge. Let us now talk about forming an edge in equilibrium. So in Othello, typically you either feed edges or you basically grab an edge. So there is a third type whereby you form an edge in equilibrium and you basically sort of leave the decision of resolving that edge towards a later stage of the game. So let us take a look at this example. So one of the types of unbalanced edge that I didn't cover in the previous episode would be a 4-disc unbalanced edge. The reason being is there are other maneuvers that are linked to a 4-disc unbalanced edge. So let's take a look at this situation over here. If I were to play as black and I were to play C1, it would be quite obvious that white would definitely respond in capturing B1 because white wouldn't want to lose the corner to H1. So that would basically just be converting a 4-disc unbalanced edge to a 6-disc balanced edge, which actually benefits white and doesn't really benefit black that much. So typically we usually don't do that. Instead, another way is grabbing the edge. But of course in this situation there is no way that we can really forcefully grab the edge. So instead of playing C1, we actually move one square to the left and we play B1. So when we play a move like B1, we basically convert the top edge into more of an edge in equilibrium where both sides could potentially actually capture this edge. So now we want to talk about wedging a 4-disc unbalanced edge, just like the same way we wedge a 5-disc unbalanced edge, but first of all we convert the top edge to an edge in equilibrium. So another reason why we want to form an edge in equilibrium is also to shift tempo. So the concept of tempo will be covered in the later lessons, but basically it's about handing the move over to your opponent. So before black actually played B1, it was actually black's turn to play. In Othello, usually at the start, we want to make as few moves with as little impact to the board as much as possible in order to control key positions and to limit your opponent's mobility. So, when we play B1 and we don't give an immediate response for white, at least not an easy one over here, that might surrender the corner, we basically shift that move over from our move to the opponent's move. So when the opponent has to play a move that is of a safe square outside, he potentially flips a couple more discs on the outside and creates new moves or moves to safer squares for me to play to. So for example, if you were to play D7, I would then have another safe move to either C6 or D8. So let us now talk about attacking that 4-disc unbalanced edge. So let's just assume that the game follows this way. A potential way to actually attack the 4-disc unbalanced edge is quite similar to how we attack a 5-disc unbalanced edge. So for example, we could give A2 and basically feed the A1 corner. And if white were to play A1, we would then jump into C1, which we still have access to, and wedge in between. So instead of wedging one disc between 1 and 5 discs for attacking a 5-disc unbalanced edge, we basically wedge 2 discs with an earlier disc set up to B1, and we maintain that 2 discs that is wedged in between in access to the corner of H1. Effectively, we have successfully traded 3 stable discs along A1 to 3 for 2 stable discs in B and C, which will be converted to stable discs after we capture H1 to the corner. So basically, we have 3 discs given to white as stable discs in exchange for a total of 7 black discs. So that is definitely a worthwhile trade for black. And at the same time, after that conversion, you realize that it's now white's turn to play. And if white gets more turns to play at the start or relatively early before the mid game, they would then effectively create more potential moves for us to play. Let's now talk about forming pairs. Much like most things in life, there are always pros and cons. So let's talk about the positive points first. The positive points of actually forming a pair would be building a strong edge, or when you're trying to close off games, or basically preparing for a creeping sort of edge play in the next few moves. So let us now take a look at this situation over here on the board. Over here, it is black to play, and black has an opportunity to actually form a pair. So what exactly is forming a pair? So if black were to play h7 over here, he is basically forming a somewhat 5-disc unbalanced edge that is hollow. Basically, he leaves two empty squares in the middle of that edge, which is also known as forming a pair. So, the positive points about building a strong edge is basically mainly used for closing off games and preparing for creeping edge play. So if once black has played h7, assuming if white plays b3 for example, black would then be able to play f8, which is basically creeping along the edge in a clockwise manner and trying to run his opponent out of moves. So given that his opponent doesn't have much of a choice, the chances are that his opponent might play into g2 to actually try to attack this unbalanced edge. So if we follow with g2, black can then play e7, which has a very strong edge play effect because this line is controlled by black. So now comes the cons or the bad points about forming a pair. So forming a pair basically creates an area that you cannot access but your opponent can access. So the bad thing about forming a pair is that you give your opponent options to play with, and he can basically choose whether to play this move, this square, or this square, and you are most likely forced to play the other one, because if he plays into this square, you wouldn't want to play anywhere else but h6 because you don't want to surrender white getting another move to h6 and grabbing the corner. Basically, regardless of where white plays, as long as white plays into one of the squares, you are forced in a way to actually respond to the other square. So forming a pair basically gives your opponent an option to attack the pair anytime and to basically use all the disc flips by making those moves to actually configure something else. Maybe it could be a diagonal, it could be somewhere that he actually needs some important access to. So if you leave that option for your opponent, you generally are at a disadvantage. However, in this situation, it is still advantageous for black. So even if white were to say jump into h5 in order to capture this disc at f5 so that he can jump out to a safe square at d7, when black responds to h6 to cover the edge and white chooses to play d7, black can then continue to form yet another pair and play to c8, and basically achieve an edge play effect. So if the game continues, with white avoiding the x squares and c squares, white could potentially play either d8 or e8. If white plays d8, black plays e8 in response, and immediately white is left with no other option but c squares or x squares. However, if white were to play into e8 and black were to respond to d8, this sequence would then follow. White would play c7, black would capture b8, and then white would be left with no choice but to play either the x square or the c square. So this is an example of how black or you could actually potentially form a pair and make use of it to actually close off games or prepare for a creeping sort of edge play. Now let us take a look at a simple example where forming a pair may not be good. So over here it is now black's turn to play. And if black were to focus on trying to play forming a pair, which may not be good in this situation, he might play h6. But h6 would prove to actually be quite a terrible move. By playing h6, black basically flips 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, a total of 6 discs in 2 different directions, and the 6 discs that he flipped are exposed to 1 and 2 or 3 and 4 new squares that white could potentially play to. So that is something that we want to avoid in Othello. So this would actually be a bad way in forming a pair. So I hope today's session has actually given you more insights in Edgeplay, and thank you very much for watching my video.